Hello, it's John Heaton, and today I'm going to talk about some relatively obscure Bob Dylan tracks from quite a fallow period for him, covering 1971 mainly, going into 72. Those 2 years, no albums to speak of, apart from the greatest hits I'm going to show you, Volume 2. And then even in 73, the only thing he came up with was Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid film soundtrack, which was pretty decent but mostly instrumental. So between New Morning came out late 70 and Blood on the Tracks January 75, Planet Waves came out January 74. So in that 3.5 year period, no albums to speak of, from no new material really, apart from this album which came out in November 71. So the Bob Dylan's Greatest Hits, or as it was called, it wasn't called Volume 1 at that stage, just came out in 67 after his crash, and did pretty well. And then the record company said, well, you're not releasing an album, can we release Volume 2? So Bob agreed on the condition that he could select the track listing and also record a few unreleased tracks, or release a few unreleased tracks to make it value for money, I guess. So I don't have the chart positions for this album. I think it did reasonably well. Anyway, so the first thing to say is it contains a great single which had been recorded in March 71, so released a bit later, Watching the River Flow, which is an absolute stormer of a song, and for me, one of the best songs of this era for Bob. Leon Russell features on piano and produces it. Jesse Ed Davis on lead guitar and electric guitar. Carl Radle on bass, and Jim Keltner on drums. And yeah, for me, I'd say it was the highlight of this album, Greatest Hits Volume 2, because it's the only place you could find it for years. I mean, it did turn up. A lot of these unreleased tracks, previously unreleased tracks, turned up on an album called Sidetracks from Bob a few years ago, which sort of brought together all the sort of relatively obscure tracks, with the exception of Rita May, which is still missing, much to my annoyance. Anyway, I absolutely love Watching the River Flow, and I would go as far as to say it's better than anything from the album which had come out a few months before, New Morning, with the possible exception if not for you. But I think this is a stronger song, and I just love the sort of carefree words. But this old river keeps on rolling, though, no matter what gets in the way or which way the wind does blow. And as long as it does, I'll just sit here and watch the river flow. I guess he could have played this song at Bangladesh, Concert for Bangladesh, but it wasn't really lyrically very appropriate to talk about just sit back and watch the river flow when the whole concert was about doing something positive. So that's probably why I didn't perform it there, although Leon Russell and Jesse Ed Davis and Jim Keltner, they were all there. So the band he laid it down with were all there. So that's one of the highlights of this album, opens the album actually. And I'll just say something for the track listing other than the new tracks. I mean, Don't Think Twice, It's All Right, obviously a worthy of inclusion. Can't think quite why it didn't make it onto the first one, probably because it wasn't a hit single. Lay Lady Lay came out later than Greatest Hits Volume 1, so that's a worthy inclusion. Stuck Inside of Mobile, great album track. I'll Be Your Baby Tonight from John Wesley Harding. All I Really Want to Do from Another Side Of. My Back Pages, Maggie's Farm, Tonight I'll Be Staying Here With You. The single, Positively 4th Street. I think the US version already had that on the previous Greatest Hits, so it's only on the UK one here, I think. All Along the Watchtower from John Wesley Harding. The Mighty Quinn, Just Like Tom Thumb's Blues, Hard Rain's Gonna Fall. So you would think Hard Rain's Gonna Fall would have been on the previous Greatest Hits, but again, maybe it just wasn't because it wasn't a hit single. If Not For You, New Morning. And then we got the new tracks, which I'm going to cover. It's the main point of this review, really, is the new tracks. And When I Paint My Masterpiece, I think it's aged really well, this song. And by the way, he started playing this song in the last 10 or 20 years in concert, or maybe more. Watching the River Flow and When I Paint My Masterpiece are fairly frequent. I wouldn't say anything is a very frequent participant in Bob's set lists, but he's played this a lot of times, and also watching the River Flow. And the band did a version of it on this album, The Songs of Bob Dylan, which I own on CD, which is various artists covering Bob Dylan songs, such as Brian Ferry, Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, Them, It's All Over Now, Baby Blue, Gary Lewis Bonds, From a Brick 6, Jason and the Scorchers, Absolutely Sweet Marie. But there's only 20 tracks on here, and I just discovered the other day there's a vinyl copy of that double album where there's, I think it's 32 tracks. There's 12 tracks more on the double vinyl on the CD. So I might try and check that out if I can find it. I think there is a copy in my local record shop, or there was when I looked online the other day. I haven't seen it in the flesh, as it were. So when I paint my masterpiece, I didn't actually jot down who the musicians are on this track. There's some quite nice slide guitar going on here, and maybe it's Jesse as well, could well be. But I really like this song. And then the other sort of unreleased tracks, which were actually Bob had offered to the record company songs from the Basement tapes, and the record company said, they're not quite up to par quality-wise. So Bob said, okay, I'll go into the studio in September 71. He did just that with a guy called Happy Traum, hope I pronounced that right, a folk singer from back in the day, and actually who he'd known from the early 60s. And I just saw that he died in last month, July 2024. So he just went in there. Happy Traum was playing banjo and singing backing vocals, and Bob was playing acoustic harmonica. And he kind of does a kind of stripped down version of I Shall Be Released, which is quite pleasant. Not quite as moving as the, I think my favourite version of I Shall Be Released is on The Last Waltz with the band, when Bob did it with Richard Manuel and the all-star cast singing the chorus, Neil Young, Van Morrison, Eric Clapton, Robbie Robertson. It's just absolutely stupendous version from November 76, San Francisco, The Last Waltz. But anyway, this is a decent version. Down in the Flood, another Basement tape sort of left over, which the Basement tapes would be released in 1975. So this was a good 4 years away when this Greatest Hits album came out. So to all intents and purposes, people hadn't heard Bob perform these songs, although I Shall Be Released had been recorded by the band on I think it's on their first album, Music from Big Pink. And I'm pretty sure Down in the Flood had been recorded by someone or other. You Ain't Going Nowhere definitely been recorded by the Byrds. And in the version of You Ain't Going Nowhere, Bob rather amusingly says, "Pack up your tent, McGuinn, you ain't going nowhere." And that was a kind of dig at Roger McGuinn, because in his version he'd said "pick up your tent" instead of "pack up your tent." So he kind of slightly muffled the words. But anyway, they're really nice acoustic versions. And there's another song which is called Tomorrow is a Long Time, which for a long time I thought was a 71 recorded track, but actually it's from a concert in April 63. And Elvis does a version of it on this album I was showing you. And I don't think it's a very good track, to be honest. It's not my favourite at all. Now, there was a track released at the time, September 71, called George Jackson, which was in aid of the activist George Jackson who died. But I'm not sure about Strangely, but it wasn't included on this album. It got to number 33 in the charts, in the US charts. And there's two versions. I forget which was the A-side, probably the band version on the A-side and acoustic version on the B-side, maybe the other way around. But it's a decent track, and you can see that, you can find that on side tracks, both versions of that on Spotify. So that was, the other thing I wanted to say is, in 1971, obviously the other highlight for Bob, apart from these new tracks which appeared on Greatest Hits, by the way, the cover is an outtake. It's a cropped picture from the concert for Bangladesh. George Harrison is right here, but he's not shown. This is also from Bangladesh. And even the gatefold picture is from Bangladesh. So they obviously knew that he'd gained sort of quite a lot of publicity through his stupendous performance at Bangladesh, which, if I'm honest, and I'm a huge George Harrison fan, I have to admit, it's the highlight of the concert for Bangladesh when he comes on and does his 5 songs. And it's quite hard for me to say that, but it's true in my opinion. You might not agree, but he just came on, and he hadn't been singing live since '66. I think he'd done a couple of concerts in '68, and he'd done Isle of Wight in '69, but basically he hadn't been on the road for years and years. George wasn't even sure if he was going to turn up. So when it came to the Bob slot, he just looked around and he saw Bob waiting in the wings with his guitar. And so George says, "I'd like to bring on a friend of us all, Mr. Bob Dylan." And he came on, and he was playing acoustic with his harmonica. He had George Harrison on electric guitar accompaniment, Ringo Starr on tambourine, and Leon Russell playing bass. And he just started off with "A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall," "It Takes a Lot to Laugh, Takes a Train to Cry" from Highway 61, "Blowing in the Wind," "Mr. Tambourine Man," and "Just Like a Woman." And it's just absolutely brilliant, spellbinding performance. The camera work, if you watch the concert, is not very great because there's not many camera angles, and I think the cameraman must have been a bit worse for wear when he recorded most of that concert, actually, because it's not very well filmed from a technician's point of view. Anyway, it is what it is. But I'm also included on Spotify. By the way, Spotify is just, thanks to my friend Madeline for telling me this, just been released on Spotify, the concert for Bangladesh, if you want to listen to it that way. And an extra track at the end of the concert is they've given you the studio version of Bangladesh, which is not very rare at all, but then Love -0, No Limit is Bob's performance of that song, which was only in the afternoon performance, was dropped for the evening. So that's interesting. Actually, there's one song on the evening set list which in the afternoon they've done it in a slightly different time signature, and I can't remember which one it is. Could be Hard Rain, but that's not on Spotify and it's not released commercially. If Not For You is not on Spotify, and actually I was reading an article saying this is a wonderful unreleased track from the concert of Bangladesh, but it never was performed, as far as I know, in front of the crowd. It was only, they ran through it in rehearsal. And if you buy the DVD of Bangladesh, you can see that George and Bob running through it, singing harmony vocal with each other. But it was dropped for the performance for some reason. Maybe they thought it was too slow, or I'm not sure. But and then, just while we're on the subject, there was a rumour that in the afternoon performance, George performed "Hear Me Lord" with the band. But if that's true, that's never seen the light of day. So, anyway, Bob Dylan in 1971 didn't give us many goodies, but he did give us this album, which is pretty good value for money for a fan, because it's a double album and it's got a whole side's worth of new material, previously unreleased, apart from if you count Watching the River Flow single. And I think Watching the River Flow is worth the admission price alone. I think it's an absolutely storming song, and I was playing it to my sons the other day and they loved it as well. It's very infectious, full of energy, and a great vocal from Bob, sort of slightly similar to New Morning, but coming out of that period and towards the sort of confident vocal that he'd display in the sort of later part of the 70s. So that was Bob Dylan's, more Bob Dylan's greatest hits. Here's the CD I have, and by the way, there's a track called Only a Hobo, which was recorded with Bob and Happy Traum, which didn't make the cut, but it does appear on another self-portrait, which is in the Bootleg series, volume 10, one of the best actually. Track 8 on disc 1 is Only a Hobo, so you can check that out. And this Bootleg series, just listened to some of that this morning, and delightful outtakes from Self-Portrait, New Morning and Nashville Skyline. So thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.